Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you like this video. It was made possible by donations from our supporters. If you're one of them, thank you so very, very much. If you're new to MBT and find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.
All right, Tom, we have a question from Lori, who is intuitive and an artist and a poet. And she's had these interesting experiences with what she calls time slips. I've had quite a few naturally, randomly occurring, and no idea how to document or study them. I would like to know if you have had any of these types of experiences. And by time slips, she means spaces where time evaporates and all of a sudden you're maybe an hour behind time or ahead of time. That happened to me. I was driving through the desert back to my home, and I was 27 miles out of my way before I realized that I'd missed the exit. That kind of time slip. I don't know if that's a great example, but I've seen that happen before where you can catch up with time or lose some time. So if I've put that in the right context, could you comment on that for Lori?
Sure, those things can happen, do happen. And those time slips can be subtle. A lot of times they're such that you're not quite sure whether time slipped or whether something else happened. It's one of those things that you're not really sure of what just took place there. Is what you think about when it happened. And then, like, did I just lose an hour of my life, or have I been, I know I've been doing this and working on this for at least 2 or 3 hours, and only 15 minutes have gone by? So they often are surprising when they happen. Typically they have a purpose, though. Sometimes the purpose is just to open up your mind to reality being larger than just that materialistic definition of reality, chug, 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 chug through it, 1 second at a time, and all the little pieces line up and all the little soldiers keep chugging along. And it's to help bump you out of that mindset of material causality. And when you have these time slips, you realize that there's another dimension to reality that seems to not really care a hang for materialism. Materialism can just keep on chugging on, but you don't chug on with it. You're kind of left out of it for a while, and you can, yes, catch back up later, or you get ahead of it. But for the most part, I've had things like that happen to me, and I have known other people that have had this, some of them quite distinctive things, quite major, and not only just with them, but involving lots of people. Whole group of people slipped their time. It was, because I'm a strange guy that has had a lot of strange experiences, people feel more at ease sharing their experiences with me than they would other people. Because if you just share them, they say, well, you must be insane, or you must be nuts, or, that must have been in a dream, or you're making it all up. And they don't feel like they get a very good response to something that's just truly very weird. So when I come along, they say, "Oh, here's a weird guy. I could tell him, he won't think I'm crazy because he's weird too." Well, yeah, I've had lots of strange experiences and unusual experiences. So I'm exceedingly open-minded, when people come with these experiences. And I also know the mechanics of how things work. And almost always I can understand exactly what happened and why it happened. And of course, they don't. They just know their experience was out of sync with the usual march of, material causality. It was this is maybe off the subject, but I'll do very briefly. I'll run through this. There was a group of people all meeting together at one person's house. They were playing cards. They had some kind of a big card game going so there was like 4, 5, 6 people that all gathered together, and suddenly that they could see a few miles away, there's some bright lights. It looked like a big chemical plant was burning. Helicopters, emergency vehicles, sirens going off. They had this big thing was going on, and they said, "Wow, what happened?" This has been something big happened. And because they had an arrangement for all of them to be someplace else that they couldn't get out of and was important, they all left that scene, and they were glad to leave the scene because it was pretty hectic. And they went outside, and there were their neighbors were outside looking at the same thing. And they said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, I don't know. I think the plant exploded." Or, so they talked to their neighbors. They interacted with people. They left. They attended to the business they left to. They came back, and everything was just the way it used to be. So they walked up to their neighbor who was still outside, and they said, "Well, what happened? What happened there? Did they put that fire out?" And the neighbor looked at him and said, "What fire? There wasn't any fire here." And they said, "Well, look, I just talked to you about 3 hours ago, and we stood on this porch looking at this blaze over that hill and decided that the chemical plant must have blown up." And the neighbor's looking at him like, no, that never happened. I don't know what you've been drinking or what kind of drugs you're on, but that didn't happen." But all 5 of them got the same picture, had the same experience, that there was this big turmoil thing happening, sirens, helicopters, lights, fire. And yet when they returned, everything was normal, and nobody remembered any fire, and there was no report of it the next day, and it didn't happen. So here was a bunch of 5 or 6 people that they not only saw the same thing, they interacted with other people in the neighborhood that saw the same thing. They
That
talked
is
about it.
dramatic.
Yeah, the whole trip they took, they were saying, "Gee, I wonder what happened. I wonder if that get resolved yet. I hope the smoke doesn't blow, in our neighborhood." And it was the thing that they were talking about. And then they get back and no, actually didn't happen at all. So you see, that's a very dramatic version. Now
Do you have an interpretation of
she
what that
didn't.
might have been?
Oh, sure. It's the same thing. That was a very, strong kind of wake up experience. You think you understand reality, and it's all this is solid physical stuff, and it's like this, but that's not reality at all. Reality, is something different. And it's to get people to start to grow, to start to get out of their ruts, to get out of the little boxes that they keep their minds in, and to take a bigger view of reality and of themselves. So that's what it was about. And the same thing it's about with this lady, probably. She's having these experiences. These experiences are being given to her, let's put it that way. That's a metaphor. She's just happy to have them because she is ready to see bigger pictures. She's ready to grow up. Her own mind and her own growth is to the point that she needs something to kind of give her a little boot, a little nudge to get her to see things differently, or at least explore things differently. So these little slips in time, as she says, are like little wake-up calls. Hey, reality isn't this button-down thing you thought. Time is not always the same. What you think of as reality doesn't really work like that. You're getting a data stream, and that data stream can have all kinds of things in it. Even burning buildings and smoke and fire and concerned neighbors can have all kinds of things in your data stream. And that's just your data stream, and your data stream creates your reality.
These
And
things were commonplace for her. It's just that she's trying to understand better um, why she can't, why these are happening to her, and why people don't really understand her the way her double brain works, she
yeah,
says.
yeah. Well, I think one of her conclusions should be that she needs to become a seeker. She needs to start going on the internet and trying to see other people who've had those kinds of
Well,
things.
she did,
And
and she found you. She says, finally, I found my tribe.
yeah,
Welcome to
and
MBT.
and to realize that reality is different, and that you have a purpose here, and that purpose is to grow, and it's to evolve, become love. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that'll make a big difference in your life, but until something really strange happens to kick you out of that little groove that you're in, then you just keep on keeping on and you never see them. So the system will do things just to get you out of that rut that you're in as far as what you think is real and what's not, and things that could happen, and things that are possible, and the things that are not. And that's basically what's going on. So become a seeker, start looking around, find bigger pictures. And then when those bigger pictures take you to something important, like love is the answer, well, start to grow up, change who you are, get rid of your fears, do things that otherwise you would never take the time to do, because now your sense of what's important and what's not has changed. So that's the reason for those things. And sometimes, most of the time, they work. Sometimes they backfire. Sometimes, when the system gives that to an individual, the individual, if they are very fear based, will turn it into some kind of scary story. Oh no, I was doing something and something, and some alien, beamed me up to another reality, or did this or did that, or I must have a tumor on my brain, and I must be. I go to the doctor and have him do a brain scan. So they turn it into a story that is negative, a story that's fearful, and you can have all sorts of people with lots of experiences that it's just because they made a fearful interpretation rather than becoming seekers and making positive interpretation. So it's kind of a neat thing. Sometimes, when you get really, really busy and you have to get something done, sometimes the larger conscious system will just give you extra time. And there's not only 24 hours in a day. There may be 27 or 28 hours in your day, this particular day, just because you need to get it done. And this system will give you that extra time to do it. And you don't know how that worked. And it's always surprising. But it will do that sometimes.
That
Um,
actually happened at one of our events. Yeah.
you
You
know,
didn't have enough time to
yeah,
finish, and all of a sudden it was all done.
yes. Those things can just happen that way. Look, I got 3 hours worth of stuff I need to give, and we only have 15 minutes. How's that going to work out? And somehow in 15 minutes you close and you did all those things, and there's no way that could have possibly happened. Yes. It's sort of like the story of Jesus feeding the multitudes with 3 fish and a bottle of water. Well, you just keep handing it out and handing it out, and there's always more, and there's
Oh, I
always
never thought of
more.
it that way. That
And
is
yeah, here's
similar.
a little for you and a little for you. And it just keeps going. And every time you reach back in the pot, there's still something in there. There's still another piece of fish or something to give to somebody. And it's the same sort of thing. You can do these things. And sometimes it's with time, sometimes it might be with stuff, it might be with fish, but it's the same sort of thing, to where you can get in a groove, get out of this reality system, And you can do those kinds of things that are impossible to do, but they happen anyway.
That is
It's
so interesting
yeah,
from that standpoint.
but
So
it's
I
yeah, it's a similar kind of thing. And you'd say, well, magic happens. Well, yeah, but this is a very kind of magical place we live in. If you look at it from the materialist viewpoint, there's all kinds of magic happening all the time. That little the wave function collapses to a physical particle is magic. Physicists don't have a clue what that means. It's just a little bit of magic that makes their world work. So they keep using it. But yes, there's a lot of things like that. But yes, it's the same way. Sometimes you can. Sometimes it does the other way. Sometimes it compacts things. You've got this long thing to do, and you don't think you'll ever get it done. But somehow, some magical way, it all gets done, and everybody's happy, and it all works out fine. Yeah, you just did 3 hours worth of work in 15 minutes, but that that happens too. It's just everybody there kind of gets into a slip, if you will, together. So it doesn't have to be just you. And the whole thing just works out like
Well,
that.
going back to that time slip with the 5 people who saw this explosion, were
Mm-hmm.
those people, did you know of them, and were they intuitive at all?
No, I didn't know them very well. I just had ran into one of them that I knew reasonably well. Well, I knew a little bit about, I guess I should say. I don't know how well that I knew him, but this person was a serious person. It wasn't somebody who's takes drugs all the time and has all kinds of wild experiences. This was a sober, serious person talking about one of the strangest things that ever happened, and it just was no explanation for it. And it bothered them for a long time until they ran into me and they said, I'm going to ask him what happened here and how did that work and why did it work? And when I went back and asked her, I said, well, how did it change you? What did you do? And she basically said it made her a seeker. She started looking for things, for answers, for understanding. And I said, and is that like a fork in your life, where you chugging along and suddenly there was you started moving off in a different direction? And yes, it was. So how does the system do that? Well, it can do those sorts of things. So it can give you 3 hours worth of time to tell everything to everybody. And then when everybody looks at their clock, guess what? We're right on time. You know?
That's wonderful, Tom.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and then we think, how did that happen? How did we get all that? Because I did all that information, and everybody has the same feel. They all look at their watch and they all kind of crinkle up their eyebrows like this, and they say, "What?" But everybody goes on and accepts it, and yeah, it's just one of those things that happen. And sometimes you need an extra few hours, and sometimes you need to get someplace in a hurry, and you just end up there. You get in your car and you drive to someplace, and you need to be there, and half an hour or so goes by and you suddenly realize you're already in their neighborhood. How did that happen? I've only been driving for a half an hour and I just finished. I'm now at the end of a 4-hour trip. How did that happen? It's an easy thing for this is a virtual reality. And in a virtual reality, almost anything can be done. Now, it usually has to happen when people are alone. Now, the 5 people together was unusual because the system wants to cover it in such a way that you go, huh? But they don't want to create a big problem. They don't want any big discrepancy, any rip in the fabric of reality. They don't want to create those kinds of issues. So it's usually done when people are alone, when people are, or just with a few people, and in circumstances that there's really no evidence that you could take out and say, look here, I had a movie of me from when I got in the car to when I arrived, and that's impossible. Well, in that case, it wouldn't be able to be done. There was some movie crew stayed with you and was watching by the clock, then it couldn't happen. But if everybody's there and they're all paying attention to the same thing and nobody's looking at their watch because they're all listening, and it just happens that they get all the information and then they look at their watch and everybody's surprised, and so it's just life goes on and it's not a big deal. It didn't cause any big thing. So they happen when there's plausible deniability. And you just kind of shake your head and realize that, well, thank you. I needed that. Or what's going on here? I think I'll study up on these sorts of things. So yeah, it's an invitation to start to grow up.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Laura, for submitting that question and for finding Tom so that you can understand better how
Yeah.
reality works. Welcome to MBT.
Yeah, the more you get into this, the more you'll hear things like that are just too strange to happen in a material world. There are people who get in their car and they drive for a while and suddenly they don't know where they are. They're in the middle of a desert, and it doesn't make sense. Or I'm trying to think of a thing. I heard there was a lady who was driving her car and an older couple pulled right out in front of her. She was driving her car and they just didn't see her. It was an elderly couple. She knew the kind of car they were driving and she hit them right square in the driver's door. Flash a light, found herself on the other side of them, looked back, and there they were still chugging on, pulling onto the highway on the other side. And she was whole, no accident ever happened. It was just a flash of light. And she found herself on the side of the road, totally flabbergasted at what just happened, because she was in the close your eyes and brace for the crash mode, and there was no crash. So things like that are impossible. But it was a lonely spot, and it was only her and her car and them and their car, and there wasn't a lot of other people involved. That's how things happen in those situations where there's plausible deniability. And when you talk to people like that, basically you'll find out that they know this experience was real. And I always ask questions. I said, well, okay, what time of the day was it that happened? And she said, noon. I was going someplace for lunch. And I said, well, did you not sleep well the night before? No, I slept perfectly well the night before. I wasn't tired. Well, were you daydreaming? Were you kind of off in the fog, daydreaming a little bit about something, No. She says, I was driving my car, paying attention, wide awake, and this is what happened. So you ask people questions and you realize that these are serious people who have had the most unusual experiences. And that stuff just happens because it wasn't yet her time to be in that wreck, and it wasn't this old couple's time to get there. And because it was a situation where nobody else was around, there was plausible deniability. So the system just modifies the reality a little bit so everybody comes out the other side and is okay. Why? Just because it's a nice system. and it does stuff like that sometimes. So, I hear a lot of those stories because people are not afraid, and they tell me, I've never told anybody this story. It's been with me as clear as the day it experienced it, and has been with me for 20 years, and I've never told anybody about it because it's too crazy to tell. But I'll tell you.
Yeah, of course.
And so I'm a repository of these kinds of experiences. So I literally hear a lot of them. And when you hear that many and you talk to the people, and these are not crazy people, these are not stressed out people, these are not goofy people, these are solid people who have had a truly amazing experience and no explanation.
I've had a couple of experiences like that. And I think, Tom, maybe they're more common than people think, that people even would admit to. But anyway.
Well, they're fairly common in my experience, because my experience takes in a lot of other people's experiences who share them with me. So I've actually probably heard 100 stories like that. Yes. So time slipping in and out of time. Just play with it. Don't be frightened by it. Just play with it and see, well, be aware of it next time it happens. And maybe you can even ask it, say, hello, is somebody playing with my time? And how come? Why are you playing with my time? Ask the question, interact with it, become part of it. Don't just, what was that? And back away from it, but connect with it. And you'll be surprised. It'll probably lead someplace. Don't be afraid to interact with it. Some people would say, well, I'd never say anything. I don't want to hear a voice. That would just make it worse. Now I'd be hearing voices besides missing time. But don't have that attitude. Have an explorer's attitude that, yeah, okay, that's strange. Is there anything else here that I could, check into or connect to? The system might very well find that an opportunity to have a conversation with you. So think of these things as little treasures that help you wake up, little opportunities, not scary things.
Absolutely. This was very fun, very insightful in some cases, very informative. Thank you so much.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.